Okay, well, I have 3 o'clock, so let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the webinar today. My name is Carrie Berger, and I'm the manager of the newly formed FIRE program with Oregon State University's Extension Service. The FIRE program engages people with locally relevant, research-based knowledge and education and fosters individual and collective action to address community vulnerability to wildfire. The FIRE program team has been strategically placed and live and work in communities throughout Oregon. Before I get started, I want to acknowledge that many of you have been affected by wildfire, and some more than others. It is not our intention to undermine the severity of your losses, but to acknowledge with respect and as much understanding as possible. Thank you so much for being on the line with us. The scale and intensity of wildfires burning across the Western US is staggering, and this past summer was no exception. Wildfire took the west side of Oregon by surprise over the Labor Day weekend. While fire is a natural part of west side landscapes, they typically burn infrequently. The firestorm that hit this area was nothing like the state had seen in the past 160 years. And unlike the other fires that burned around the state this summer, the Alameda fire burned almost exclusively within cities. If you'd like a deeper dive into Oregon's 2020 fires and resources to help, visit our After the Fire story map. These wildfire events remind us of how important it is to plan and be prepared for wildfire. But planning and preparing can feel really daunting. What can you do? Who can help? Every community is unique, but we can learn from our neighbors, whether they are next door, across the state, or even in a different state. We've asked our neighbors from Southwest Colorado to talk to us about their journey to come together, rebuild, and take the action needed to save their lives and property from wildfire, and the impact their actions had on wildfires in their neighborhood since. Today is the beginning of our journey, a journey I hope you take with the FIRE program and its partners like the Oregon Department of Forestry and the Oregon Office of State Fire Marshal. Today's webinar is the first of a series. We are planning a fire preparedness and prevention campaign for you, relevant to your local areas. This series will focus on wildfire preparedness, including how to make your home and property more resilient to wildfire, how to work individually and as a community, and so much more. Now, for those of you tuning in from other states, I am happy to have you join in on those webinars. However, I encourage you to also reach out to your local community leaders to get information on fire preparedness specific to your area. I'll be posting webinar information to the FIRE program website as the information and registration becomes available. I'll also send webinar announcements to the email you registered with for today's webinar. Okay, I have some housekeeping I need to do before I introduce the speakers. This session is being recorded, and all webinar recordings can be found on our Forestry and Natural Resource Extension YouTube channel. We are also streaming live on the Extension's Facebook page. Your audio has been muted. If you are having audio troubles and are connected to your computer's audio, I suggest hanging up and dialing in with your phone. You can always post a question in the chat window if you are having technical difficulties. You can find the chat icon in the lower part of your screen. My colleague Amanda and I will be monitoring the chat window and can help you out. If you have a question on the information that is being presented, please type your question into the Q&A window. The Q&A icon is also found at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer your questions along the way, and we've reserved some time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions live. It is now my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Amanda Brenner. Amanda works in Oregon as an Extension Educational Program Assistant, but she's come to us from Colorado, where she's worked closely with our guest speakers. Amanda?
Hi, thank you, Carrie. Just a second. Can you hear me all right?
I sure can.
Okay, thanks. I've been having some issues with my internet today. Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here with us today. As Carrie said, my name is Amanda Brenner, and I am the Education Program Assistant for the Forestry and Natural Resources Program in Clackamas County here in Oregon. I also coordinate the annual Clackamas Tree School and now Tree School Online. I just want to say how much I've enjoyed my time working for Forestry and Natural Resources Extension. And now that we have the fire team, I'm happy that I have been able to help support their mission to strengthen our community's wildfire preparedness efforts. Before coming to Oregon, as Carrie mentioned, I lived in Southwest Colorado where I worked with today's guests as a program coordinator for Wildfire Adapted Partnership. I would like to welcome Ashley Downing, Charlie Landsman, and Paulette Church. They have a wonderful journey to share with you, and I'm privileged to have had the opportunity to be a part of that journey. And I am so happy that they were able to be here with us today. Our first guest is WAP's Executive Director, my former boss, Ashley Downing. I will let her introduce herself and talk about the organization and its history.
Thanks, Amanda. As Amanda mentioned, my name is Ashley Downing. I'm the Executive Director of Wildfire Adapted Partnership, and we are headquartered in Durango, Colorado, and we work in the 5 Southwest counties. Sorry, it looks like the presentation locked up. Let's see. Can you guys see it again? You see it still?
We sure can. Yep,
Okay,
there you go.
sorry about that. As Amanda mentioned, I'll start off and tell a little bit about our history as an organization, and then I'll pass it off to Charlie Landsman to look at some of the communities and then zero in on one specific community with Paulette Church, who is one of our neighborhood ambassadors and also on our board of directors. So Wildfire Adapted Partnership is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Our mission is to work with individuals and communities to protect lives and property from wildfire. So we are really focused on that defensible space area around a home for individuals and on a community level with individual communities trying to build fire adapted communities. We were founded as a grassroots effort, and I'll get into more about that timeline in just a minute. And at that time, we were known as Firewise of Southwest Colorado. And that was our name until 2018. So if you hear any reference in here to Firewise of Southwest Colorado, that's the same organization, Wildfire Adapted Partnership. And we are a small organization, only have 4 employees, less than 4 full-time equivalent. And we work in, as I mentioned, those 5 counties. So very small, but mighty in the work in the breadth of activities and also the geographic area that we work in. For a lot of those that are not from Colorado that may be on this webinar, we serve the 5 Southwest counties, so that blue rectangle down in the corner, 4 Corners area. Those include Archuleta, Dolores, La Plata, Montezuma, and San Juan counties. It's a population of about 100,000 people, almost 1.4 million acres of private lands. And within that population, we also have a second home population. So a lot of absentee landowners that in the summer makes the population much higher in this area. About 90% of those residents live in the wildland urban interface. So these are communities that have high to very high wildfire risk. And a little bit on our geography, since that varies a lot by around the country. So we range from 6,000 to 14,000 feet. Predominantly, especially in the middle counties there, La Plata and San Juan County, we have ponderosa pine with gamble oak understory and mixed conifer at a higher elevation. And then over to the west is a much more pinyon juniper. So a bit of a timeline about how our organization came to be. So in 2002, there was a large fire that burned to the north of Durango. It was called the Missionary Ridge Fire. And at that time, it was one of the largest fires within the state. It burned 70,000 acres and destroyed 46 cabins and homes. So out of this event, there was a lot of interest in trying to work towards preventing this from happening again. And so in 2003, Durango Fire Protection District hosted some representatives from NFPA, and they attended or put on a workshop for about 100 attendees. And out of that workshop, 40 people really wanted to keep that momentum going. So a wildfire council was created. And at that point, it was called Firewise of Southwest Colorado. And it was really that grassroots effort that kind of kept those meetings going, interactions between those individuals who were interested, learning from each other. And all that activity was done under another local nonprofit who acted as our fiscal agent for those first almost 15 years. And then in 2004 was our first year of our neighborhood ambassador program. And that started with 11 volunteers. And this really built the backbone of our organization. And I'll explain a little bit about that program and what those volunteers do in their communities in just a minute. And out of there, over the next 14 years, really continued to grow, got some additional grant funding, brought in some different coordinators to work in neighboring counties and bring in some more communities. So it just continued to grow to the point that in 2018, we were large enough to become our own organization. And that's when we became our own standalone nonprofit. And at that point, we changed our name to Wildfire Adapted Partnership. It's been almost 2.5 years ago now. And so our work really focuses on a two-pronged approach. So we work on wildfire education, and second would be our wildfire mitigation incentive programs. So for our education, it includes a lot of education outreach events. This could be educational events, although right now that's kind of on hold. All of ours are going to be over Zoom at this point because of COVID. But we do a lot of tabling. We get out there at events, get the messaging out to interested people in the community. Also present at HOA and community meetings. We continue with that model that started off our organization of fire council meetings. We also do one-on-one home wildfire risk assessments where our county coordinators will go out and meet individually with homeowners and present to them, do pretty much a review assessment of their property, their house and surrounding area, and give recommendations for how to make it more defendable in the event of a wildfire. We also put on workshops and field tours, but the main backbone of our organization and our education program is our neighborhood ambassador program. So the way this is set up is we have volunteers from communities who decide they want to be that spark plug or catalyst that helps to get wildfire adaptation efforts moving in their community. So these individuals do outreach to their neighbors, make committees on the HOA boards that just focus on fire preparedness activities. They also plan community work days. They do community wildfire protection planning, events, evacuation planning as well. They might have some events and things around evacuation and what to do when a wildfire occurs. And so what we do for these volunteers is we provide them with training and ongoing support, education. Those fire council meetings, again, allow opportunities from our ambassadors to learn from each other. We also provide access to the community to our partner agencies. So there's wildfire experts who come to our fire council meetings and are able to share with more communities and make sure that their time is to the best to get their word out as well. So we make those connections between agencies and individual communities. So we've grown from those 11 that we started off with in 2004 to 150 volunteers now, and they work in 100 communities throughout Southwest Colorado. And just a little bit more about our mitigation incentive program. So our education is really focusing on the community and individual level at helping them to understand the risk and what needs to happen. And then our incentive programs really help to offset some of those costs for homeowners so that the work gets accomplished. We have a defensible space cost share program where we can reimburse up to 50% for completing D-space projects around the home. Chipper rebate, we can provide up to $250 for an individual or $750 for an HOA if they hire a crew to come out and do chipping or rent a chipper for a community workday. And that is one of our longest mitigation incentive programs, and it's very well known in the area. And we also do some incentives for community projects. So our Kickstart grant is one that we like to help newer communities that may have just completed a planning document to help them kind of get over that first hump to be able to do more wildfire mitigation in their community. So through our Kickstart grant, we can offer up to $7,500 for communities to get those projects accomplished. So all of our incentive programs are grant-based, where we are grant supported. So that is both national, federal, state, and then local grants as well. And so on some of our state grants that are available here in Colorado, we also act as a fiscal agent and help smaller communities to take on the responsibility of grant management so that they can get work done on the ground. And so all of our programs and a little bit more about our funding that we have specifically in Southwest Colorado, you can visit our website. The link's here, and I'm sure it will be sent out afterwards or made available to everybody to look into how we get work done on the ground. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Charlie Landsman, who is a county coordinator for Wildfire Adapted Partnership. He works in La Plata and San Juan counties, and he's going to talk a little bit about specific communities and wildfire events in Southwest Colorado.
Perfect. Can everybody hear me all right?
Sounds good, Charlie.
Perfect. So my name is Charlie Landsman. As Ashley mentioned, I am the La Plata and San Juan County Coordinator for Wildfire Adapted Partnership. I want to start off by thanking everybody who put in time to make this webinar happen, as well as all of the attendees. So thank you for spending your afternoon with us. And yeah, my presentation is really going to be focused on a couple of different examples of where fires have either impacted our communities after we've done work or impacted communities that then spurred work to happen. So the first fire that I want to talk about is the Lightner Creek fire. This fire happened in June of 2017 and ended up burning 412 acres. There were 170 homes either evacuated or on pre-evacuation from this fire, and the vast majority of those were in the Rafter J community. 145 homes in the Rafter J community. It's a one-way in, one-way out community, so that definitely caused a lot of concern on whether or not they could successfully evacuate that entire community quickly if things did change with the fire. And one of the amazing things that came out of this was within the first year, Rafter J really decided to take that step towards becoming a fire adapted community. For years prior to this, fire officials, emergency managers, and even residents in this area have been concerned about the Rafter J community. And this Lightner Creek fire really sparked that interest, for lack of a better term, into making this community really prioritize that treatment. The first year that we were working with them, we really focused on that chipper rental rebate. It was interesting because I was talking with the ambassador about once a week. And the first time he called me, he said, "All right, Charlie, we decided we're going for the chipper rental rebate. We'll have one day of chipping for the community." The second time he called me, he said, "All right, we have a lot of piles starting to show up along the street. I think we're going to have a weekend of chipping." And by the third time he called me, he basically decided that they were going to have about 2 full weeks of a chipper crew going through the community in order to chip all the slash that had accumulated along those roads. And I really like this story because it shows how sometimes people aren't against cutting things. They aren't against doing that fuels reduction work. It's just those small barriers of what is going to happen with all of that once they do that work that stops people from doing it. So it really was a great program to really jump in head first for a lot of those community members. The second year that we worked with Rafter J, they completed a community assessment, which is a large-scale planning document for the community. It's similar to a community wildfire protection plan, but somewhat abbreviated. And then they also went after things like the Kickstart grant. They really focused on roadways, and especially within those areas on blind turns or intersections, so that if they do have a fire moving through there, it's less likely to have vehicle accidents or collisions when firefighters and fire apparatus is trying to get into the community as those residents are getting out. They also developed a community workday program and really did that through what they call block captains, where they have people in different parts of the community who know their neighbors and basically will call them up and say, "Hey, this day we're working on, your yard or my yard, or we're working on the common space." The third year of the program with Rafter J, they actually established a $16,000 line item in the HOA budget. So they actually took that to the community and basically completed an assessment to increase the HOA fees in order to ensure that they have that annual budget for wildfire mitigation and specifically fuels treatments. This past year, they completed 14 miles of roadside thinning. So they have a 15-foot right-of-way from the edge of the road, and they are working hard and trying to complete as much of that thinning as possible while still encouraging individual residents to do their own part on their own property. The other interesting thing about the Lightner Creek fire is, as you can somewhat see from the map up there, Durango is not too far to the east from where that burned, and that fire actually burned up the backside of Perrins Peak and started to crest over really directly into the city of Durango. That has helped a lot of residents realize that even if you live on the grid or in downtown Durango, that you're not necessarily completely protected from wildfire. There is potential for a fire to move into pretty much any area around our city. So the next fire that I want to talk about, and I'll try to be brief with this one because I know Paulette is going to talk a lot about it, is the 416 fire. This fire ended up burning 54,000 acres and is the largest fire that we've had since the Missionary Ridge fire in 2002. There were 1,300 evacuations, and that list of communities there is all the different communities that we work in and have been working in either prior to or since the 416 fire. So we had a lot of different communities impacted by that fire. And if we skip to the next slide, I'll tell you a story about one of the specific communities that's not talked about nearly as much as what Paulette's presentation will be on. But the big thing about the 416 fire, especially at the beginning, was fire personnel really wanted to keep that fire on the west side of Highway 550. And so when you look at where private property is, where most of the homes are, it's all on the east side of Highway 550 and mainly north of where that fire started. And so the concern was if it got established over on that side of the highway, then it would carry up through the Rockwood neighborhoods, through Glacier Club, up to Electra Lake and Lakewood Meadows, and there were thousands of residences that could have been destroyed. So in 2016, a County Road 200 treatment was in place. County Road 200 is right on that south side of that where that fire happened, but across the highway, and it was a 15.7 acre shaded fuel break that was 100 feet wide. The first couple of days of the 416 fire, they had a number of spot fires that happened over the highway. I was trying to remember back and I couldn't find great statistics, but I remember at least 3 specific half acre to 1 acre spot fires that were close to getting away from some of the fire personnel over there, and they did an amazing job ensuring that didn't happen. But one of the things that really helped that was that they had this anchor point along this road with this shaded fuel break to be able to work out of, so that they could go in and make sure that fire didn't get established on that side of the highway. This project also was exciting because it was a collaborative effort between multiple businesses. Private individuals donated large sums of money to make it happen, as well as many different HOAs. So it was a great example of how communities can come together with business and with private property to ensure that they're doing that mitigation work to be as effective as possible. Another fire that was in a community that I've worked in is the Aspen Trails Cabin Fire. It actually was a structure fire that then transitioned to another structure that was very close in proximity, and then transitioned into a wildland fire. And so basically by the time that the firefighters arrived on scene, the 2 structures were fully engulfed and that fire was moving up the hillside. This fire occurred in November of 2019. And in a couple months prior, that summer, we had actually completed a treatment on that property. That really helps prevent the spread, or at least slow the spread, to buy time for those fire personnel to get into that area. The picture on the left shows the ignition point of that fire. And you can see as you go up in the picture, that actually is a pretty steep uphill. And you can see how many structures and residences are not very far from that home. So by doing that mitigation, it really slowed the expansion of that fire and allowed firefighters to get there to knock it down before it got to some of those other structures. 2 other fires that I wanted to mention are the 76 and the 84 fires. These both happened in May of 2020. The first one, the 76 fire, it happened right above one of our neighborhoods that we work in, Forest Lakes. That's one of the largest subdivisions in the area with 800 homes and 2,000 lots. It was very interesting timing because it happened right as we were beginning a defensible space cost share program in that community. We ended up getting 27 projects done and about 31 acres treated in that area. But it was definitely eye-opening for that community that when they see hotshot crews and fire apparatus driving through their neighborhood regularly, it really makes them think about whether or not they need to do that work on their homes. It's been another neighborhood that we for years have had a lot of trouble getting programs really up and running because it is such a large community. But this was an instance where smoke in the air really spurred people to really prioritize that treatment and especially rebudget money to make sure that they could do those treatments as soon as possible with the help of our defensible space cost share program. The other fire, the 84 fire, it was 55-acre fire and it threatened and evacuated Enchanted Forest Estates and Tween Lake Estates. The picture on the right is a picture of the 84 fire, and basically Enchanted Forest Estates and Tween Lakes both are where that smoke is settling into that valley. So they start right there. And the big concern was because of COVID, the emergency managers knew that there were a lot more people likely at home than there would be during a normal workday or a normal time. So they really had to make that call to evacuate early because of the concerns of capacity, especially because while there's multiple ways in and out, all of those ways in and out for both those communities are essentially right where that smoke is settling in and also where embers were settling in. So that fire was really another driver for those communities to step forward with their mitigation. And because of that, we have, or partially because of that, we have secured funding for a big project in Enchanted Forest Estates this next summer to do additional road right-of-way and hazardous fuel thinning along their roadways. It also helped encourage the neighborhood just to the left of where that smoke is. You can see some of those homes out in the grassy areas. That's a neighborhood called Sweetwater Springs. And watching the hillside next to their community burn, it really motivated that community to immediately give me a call, give the fire department a call, and start pushing towards doing whatever they can to mitigate. So we're excited to have that opportunity to work with that community in the future. So a little bit of a different story is the 6-shooter fire. It happened in June of 2020, and it was a 224-acre fire. The interesting thing about this fire is it impacted Wolfwood Refuge, which is a wolf refuge. And in 2017, I started working with them to develop an evacuation plan for 55 wolves and wolf dogs specifically. I have to say it was a pretty unique experience trying to write an evacuation plan for wolves and wolf dogs, but it also is a very complicated situation. Some of those animals can be put on a leash and walked out like a normal pet. Some have to have specific handlers. Some have to be tranquilized. And so one of the things that we wanted to do with that is make sure that we could at least get as much done as quickly as possible with these animals. And so that was pre-positioning trailers. That was ensuring that we have essentially go bags or boxes or trucks for all the equipment necessary to get those animals out and have those animals safely housed wherever they do end up. It was a unique success story because within 5 minutes, they already had started loading the first animals into those trailers. We made sure that we had those trailers pre-positioned so you could back a truck up, hook up the trailer, and basically immediately start loading animals into that trailer. We also developed a phone tree so that they could send out that notification to volunteers, and they had 20 volunteers to their location within 30 minutes. So it was another example of how, while fuels reduction is something that we all talk about a lot, it's not the only thing that goes into wildfire preparedness or prevention work. You also need to think about evacuation and other aspects. So the final fire that I'll talk about is the ice fire. This happened in October of 2020 at just about 10,000 feet in elevation. This picture over to the right is actually pulled from our Colorado Wildfire Risk Assessment Portal. And the specific layer that is there is wildfire risk. So it was something that was somewhat enlightening to us to see a fire at 10,000 feet in elevation in an area that hasn't historically had very high fire danger. It ended up burning 596 acres, and 23 hikers and 3 dogs had to be evacuated by helicopter because it started at the base of one of the most popular trailheads in the area. Like I said, it really just shows us that we need to rethink the places and the areas that we think of as burning, and we need to not only plan for the fires that we've seen historically in the past regularly, but also that those fires that we're starting to see in the future. The major concern with this, beyond those lives on that trail, was as the smoke would settle at night, it would basically run down that Mineral Creek drainage down into the city of Silverton. And they were getting embers and smoke settling down in that city. And so it was, like I said, enlightening that this small town at really high elevation with not a ton of fuel around it still was seeing those impacts from a wildfire, and it has spurred some additional planning that's going to happen in the future. So some of the takeaways that I want people to think about is, first off, mitigation and preparation. These things, they do work. They are effective. We have been very lucky here in that most of the programs that we've set up and most of the fires that we've seen, that the mitigation has worked. The unfortunate part is that there are no guarantees in this line of work. I really, really wish that I could guarantee all of the work that I do, but that's unfortunately not how the natural world works. And so it's important to do the best planning possible, but it's also important to acknowledge that there's risk everywhere, and we can't completely eliminate risk from wildfires around us. Another point I always like to make is wildfire prevention work is never done. It's never complete. There's going to be regrowth and retreatment needed. There's going to be changes in the community of new people moving in who need to plan for that evacuation. There's always going to be that extra step to take, and there's always going to be more to do. But that being said, it is important work, and it's important that we really focus on it and focus on it as early as possible. The other thing is fuels treatments are only part of preparation and part of mitigation. I know I mentioned that with some of the examples here, but we really need to look at this from a holistic approach and not just think about cutting down trees, cutting down vegetation. We need to look at those other more complex aspects. And another point I always like to make, especially to new community members, is you need to start somewhere. Oftentimes when somebody gets a community wildfire protection plan or a community assessment or even an individual structure assessment for their home, they get overwhelmed and they think, oh, there's no way I can ever possibly accomplish this. You can, and you will, and we have seen that with a lot of our communities. You need to start somewhere. You need to start where you can and just make sure that you're devoting time to that year after year, and eventually you will get there. Another point is the fires are changing, and I think that we've all seen that, unfortunately, is that the fires of the past are not necessarily the fires of the future, and we need to make sure that we're trying to be proactive in planning for those fires and not just thinking about what has happened in the past. And finally, while disasters can be a big motivator for people to make a big push, it's not the only time that people are willing to focus on wildfires and focus on wildfire prevention. Our ambassador program has grown every year, whether we've had a big fire season or a small fire season. It's really about building those relationships within communities to ensure that that's happening year after year, and that it's not just something that we're focusing on whenever the smoke is in the air. We want to build those relationships and make sure that we can continue doing this in the long term. So on the screen is my contact information. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, but I will go ahead and pass the mic off to Paulette Church, our next presenter, who will share some more information about her experiences with the 416 fire.
Thank you so much, Charlie. And thank you all for attending. And we hope that what we give you are some real practical ideas. I'm going to speak about how we changed our culture, tell the story of how we changed it and what we've done. And hopefully it will benefit all of you. The other thing I'm going to be working on talking about is recovery, because that was the hardest part for us. Is finding help. How do you recover after the wildfire? Someone mentioned in the chat box the it's interesting how we name our fires in Colorado. This one is called the 416 fire because it was the 416th call for a fire to Durango Fire Protection District. Some are named by the geography, but that's how this one was named. I'm an educator. I've been teaching preschool through grad school since 1969. So that's when I retired running a nonprofit. I became really involved in our HOA in fire mitigation. When we moved to the ranch in 1999, Falls Creek Ranch is 940 acres in the Wooey, but there's 100 1-acre lots, 98 of which are circles. Why are they circles? Because it's cheaper to survey a pin and not survey 4 squares. Nobody's lot virtually touches another lot. So we have 840 acres of common property of that ponderosa, gambrel oak, and some mixtures. When we moved here in 1999, you couldn't cut down a dead tree. You couldn't cut down oak brush because it was all founded in 1972 to be all natural. You couldn't take wood off the ridge. You couldn't pick up wood from the ground and put it in your fireplace. And we had one work day a year, and that was just trim back the brush so we could see around the corners. We had a huge slash pile, and it was only burned when the snow was on the ground deep enough that Durango Fire Protection District would allow it. And at one point, we didn't have enough snow. And for 2 years, we had a pile of about 80 tons. So we were the Eeyore of fire mitigation. We're asbestos. Falls Creek does not burn. However, by 2018, we were the tigers of fire mitigation. And you'll see in a video I'll share later that our Durango chief, Hal Doty, really made a difference for us. And the mitigation we did, Rob Powell is the operations chief for a Type 1 incident crew. We protected Durango because of the mitigation work we did. It did not become a paradise, but it came very close to becoming a paradise. And we actually received a wildfire mitigation award in 2019. So how did we change? Why did we change? What did we do? Well, as was mentioned earlier, the Missionary Ridge fire was in 2002. It was a large fire. And during that fire, at one point, we had some dry thunderstorms come in. And the Missionary Ridge is about 1.5 miles across the Animas River Valley from where we live. And that day, all of the debris, the embers, were pulled up into that thunderstorm head. The column collapsed, and we had dropping clumps of aspen leaves, oak leaves dropping out of the sky, and it started the valley fire. In the valley fire, in Falls Creek is where it started. While we had so many homes and destroyed over in Missionary Ridge, we lost in 10 minutes 4 homes and 6 right below us in a development below us. During that fire, they marked our houses in green or red ribbon. And we had the following year in 2003, the fire chief, Dan Noonan, came to meet with our residents to answer questions about the fire that we had just made it through. And one of our residents said, I had a red ribbon on my driveway. What did that mean? And he said, you know, if it was unsafe for firefighters, I couldn't risk lives. And she said, but my husband and I built that home with our own hands. It took years. You would not defend it? He said, I can't risk lives to defend your home. And that was the point where we realized we're not asbestos and we got to be responsible and take care of business. This is a picture of that valley fire. And Falls Creek is up on a hill about 800 feet above this home. And you can see it burned down the hill, not up the hill, down the hill. And it crossed Highway 550. It took a lot of barns, a lot of buildings, highly visible. Roads were closed. We didn't lose lives, but that was part of the loss out of the Visionary Ridge fire. So what did we do? The first thing was the meeting that was alluded to that started the whole fairways of Southwest Colorado. And we learned that we needed a community wildfire protection plan. We hadn't had anything like that. This is one of the meadows that we have. You can see we're in the Red Cliffs up to the right. The development was built so that the meadows are open because we have elk and deer and mountain lion going through the meadows. The houses are in the trees, so you don't see them. That was the design. So one of the things we really started with right away was training. And this is a training going on in our home, actually, my husband there in the suspenders. And what we did was create crew chiefs. And crew chiefs then took on certain areas within the ranch that they were going to be mitigating. You'll see in the lower left a box with helmets. One of the things we found was that a lot of these people had been using chainsaws for years. They had no chaps, they had no helmet, they had no training, they didn't know how to maintain their equipment. And at one point, we'd have like 8 people pulling branches and 3 people chainsawing in a very small space. And it was clear we needed to know how to do it safely. The gentleman to the right is actually from Spain. He's part of a training program that happens every year in Chama for firefighters from around the world who want to learn how to do prescribed burn. We had done a prescribed burn on the periphery of our development in 2001, right before the Valley Fire. And so we knew that it could work on the edges, but he came in, he had all the equipment. He was a helicopter pilot, and we got him linked with one of ours. So training and those crew chiefs being trained, and then they recruit the volunteers. So makes my job as ambassador easier. And here you see whatever truck, whatever trailer we have, but you'll notice these folks are out there loading the slash to be taken care of, but there's nobody cutting around them. And on some of the really dangerous stuff or the things that were close to homes or that were large, we hired professional sawyers. We used some grant money for that. And then our volunteers came in and handled the slash and trimmed along our roads. That's a biggie. Creating spaces, pullouts in our development so that fire trucks could pass made a huge difference when the 416 hit. We have this giant burn pile. There's not a pickup truck there, but those piles are about 12 feet high and 20 to 30 feet wide. And we needed to pull them apart so we could they could light one and get it burning and then light the next one and then light the next one. So we had these giant piles and sitting there, and it was so hazardous. But Durango Fire would come out and help us with it and have a truck there with a tank. But it wasn't a good, healthy way of doing it. So one of the things I do is I write grants. And so later I asked my volunteers, what do you need? What do you want? We had been spending some of our grants for over $200,000. We were spending it all to hire in professionals to come in and do all the work. And then we just trimmed up around the roads. And my volunteers said, hey, we'll supervise, but let's hire our own crews. We can treat a lot more land by using summer workers, volunteers, and having the right equipment. On the left is a dump trailer. That puppy is so easy to unload. Everything slides out. And to the right is an air curtain burner. We bought a used air curtain burner with a grant, and that creates a tornado on its side, if you will. And you can put slash in that. We use it almost exclusively now to burn pine needles. The hardest thing to get rid of for us are pine needles. And I buy through the little state farm grant you get, or you can apply for Wildfire Preparedness Day. I buy about 1,000 paper leaf bags, and we hand them out for free to people. They fill them up, and those go in that air curtain burner, we burn up at least 1,000 bags a year. And that's how we get rid of our pine needles. If we dump them on the ground, we can't burn them. And now we've actually been able to buy a chipper so that we don't have to haul our slash to the burn pile. We haul the chipper to where the slash is. This was one of the workday after that big fire that you saw. That was our last big fire. You can see the air curtain burner on the left. You can see different trailers that have been unloading. We've got our Volvo in there, and you can see that smoldering from underground. That's what we did. We buried a lot of the big stuff that was very hard to burn. But again, we created a lot of smoke, and these fires would burn for a week. Now, one of the things we put into our community wildfire protection plan was to do an annual Firewise education meeting, which we do again in conjunction with Wildfire Preparedness Day. We actually gave land to our fire department, and they built a firehouse, and they keep a structure fire truck there and a brush fire trailer. We have where we talk about what's going on. Our partners come in, Colorado State Forest Service, Wildfire Adapted Partnership. We had State Farm come in and talk about the value of mitigating in terms of getting a mortgage, refinancing a mortgage, or your rate that you pay for home insurance. Part of it every time is an activity. So people come, we're gonna have, you can see on the left on that table with the red and white checkered cloth, that's from National, it's the Ready, Set, Go bags. And we were handing them out. We hand out stuff. On the lower right, the fire department will bring a practice. We had so many people that had never turned on a fire extinguisher. They had no idea how to use it. And so this was a chance for them after the meeting to actually give it a try and learn how to use it. Now, one of our key things is brats and beer. Every time we have a work day, every time we have one of those training meetings, afterwards, we have a famous barbecue potluck. And that's a chance to get people to talk about mitigation, keep the energy up, share what they're doing, get to know new neighbors. And there's a real energy around that, that it's the social part. We'll work for 3 hours, and sometimes we'll party for 2 hours afterwards. But that's a part of keeping your people engaged and bringing your new residents into the culture of, this is what we do. If you want to get to know people where you live, this is how you do it. You work on our mitigation days. We had too many small trees after a big project. They're white fir and they're highly flammable, but they're one of the top 10 Christmas trees. Now, every day as I drove to work before I retired, I looked at that, having lived in Iowa, Minnesota for a while, and said, Christmas tree farm. That's a Christmas tree farm. So it took me a couple of years to convince the board to let us to cut down these trees rather than taking them and burning them, letting people pick a Christmas tree, make a donation to Firewise. And I'm holding up one of their little bags that we gave out to everybody along with information on the table. Always a hot chocolate and whipped cream and apple cider. And you can see families are down there, they're cutting their trees. We've been doing it now for 7 years. So a lot of times you can take something that looks like a liability and work and make it fun. In 2018, we were in exceptional drought. This is the map shortly in May 28th, 22nd. And you'll see we are in exceptional drought. We have been there again this year. It said to me as a Firewise ambassador, not if we're going to have a wildfire, it was simply, when are we going to have a wildfire? So I really looked at what were things that we had never done that we needed to do, or things that we had done in the past that we needed to make sure they worked. One of the things that we did was on that annual Firewise Preparedness Day meeting, one of our couples, their son is a helicopter pilot who does the drops. And so he came after at the end of the meeting, he dipped out of our lake twice. He did 2 different drops. And then below that, you see cars on a 2-track. We are a one way in, one way out. However, I was able to renew agreements we had with the Forest Service, a church camp below us, and a neighborhood below us to renew an agreement from 2006 that allowed us, in case of an emergency, to exit through this other route. We were platted in 1972. No one had ever driven down this road. And we worked with the fire department. You'll see some signs. We went down and did some work along this area. We put reflectors along this area. And after the meeting, 55 people rode in 22 cars and went down this and went all the way back. Here's where you report in, that all important thing, to learn that they could do it. I also use during the meeting videos that are scary, that show people escaping from a fire. The one in Canada is a really good one. It shows them driving right by trees on fire. It shows the embers. And so many people said afterwards, I now know I can escape. I don't have to hide in my house and maybe burn up in my house. If I know what I'm doing and I'm packed and I know now that I want to leave early. And that's a huge piece of Ready, Set, Go. So afterwards, what we do? We did beer and brats. So here's another shot of us in May. In June, this is what it looked like. This is the scene as we left Falls Creek Ranch. The story, which our Fire Chief Doty will tell you about, follows this, but it blew up that day. And I could never have been more proud of our residents. They had their cars packed. They had plans made for their pets. They had checked on their neighbors. They had made plans for where they were going to stay. They knew exactly where they needed to report in with Red Cross and let family know that they were safe. But this was an extremely scary day. This is that same day. This is the 416 fire that same day. And you can see Falls Creek is where my arrow is. Falls Creek it's those meadows I mentioned, and then the houses are all along the meadows. The fire had started over here, had backed down through here, and was coming toward us. And you can see even spotted over at Dyke Canyon. So it was really, really backing down into us. This is one of the homes. One of the things that I've always done is include neighbors and neighborhoods around us in all of our trainings, all of our events on Fireways, all of the videos that I send out or that I show. And so Ellen and Chris Gans, they're the house most to the north. This fire, 2 weeks before the fire, she had finally listened to my presentation and looked at the information I'd given and that we had shared, my committee shared on our plans. And she had 18 ponderosas removed in all the oaks. And 2 weeks later, the fire came within 15 feet of their deck. And it was only because they'd created some green for the firefighters to stand in that they had a fighting chance to do a backburn, because above these homes are cliffs and there are roll-offs. There are logs on fire rolling off the cliffs into these yards. But the firefighters had a chance. They set their pumpkins up. They set their sprinkler systems up, and they were able to go in and stop the fire from taking their homes. No homes were lost. This is one of my favorite photos from the fire. And partway through, we were about 2.5 weeks into the fire, and firefighters were just being beat down. Everybody was exhausted. We were all evacuated we'd already been out for 6 or 7 days. And we had a hurricane come in, and it was called Bud. This Bud's for you. And this is my favorite photo taken by some of the firefighters. Once that rain hit, and it was a steady overnight rain, it slowed everything down and enabled the firefighters. That was one of our pieces of luck that we had that really helped us.
It was a typical weekday morning, and we got a call that there was a brush fire that had started.
You know, at first we could see this plume of smoke. It seemed like it was quite a ways away, and I thought, well, it'll never get here, you know.
In the first 5 minutes, it went from being a start to almost 5 acres, and in the next 5 minutes, they were calling it maybe 25 acres. So it was spreading incredibly rapidly.
And we went on pre-vac, and we saw it approach closer and closer, you know, and it's still quite a ways away, you know. I thought they'll stop it before it gets here, not realizing how intense it was.
And I said to him, Falls Creek is an area that we can stop this fire at. The reason is that they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's well mitigated, and it's a fire-wise community, and we have the ability to slow this thing down and stop it at Falls Creek. I believe that we can save that neighborhood. They started basing their actions on the contingency that, hey, when the fire gets to Falls Creek, that's where it's going to turn the corner.
This neighborhood has committed for the last 10 plus years to reducing their wildfire risk, and they've really taken ownership of the fact that they live in an area that's prone to wildfires. They've decided that they're going to take responsibility for their land and reducing that wildfire risk to give these firefighters a chance when they come into this community.
In the back of my mind, I thought these guys are going to save this place.
The area where we turned it westward and we stopped it from coming into the community of Durango, this was the pivotal neighborhood. This was the fight that won the war.
We helped them save it, and that was a big compliment to us to hear them firemen, professionals, say, you did a good job here. That made us feel really good. And it's not just us, it's the whole ranch.
There's no guarantees in this line of work, but what they can do is they can stack the deck in their favor. And this community has accepted that, and in this situation, they really saw the effectiveness of how that work it really improves the odds when it comes to major wildfire moving through.
I think any homeowner's responsibility living in a forest like we do is help these firemen protect your home. Fire, you don't know if one's going to happen today or tomorrow or when. You know, you can be in denial, but it's, you know, it's a possibility. You have to accept that responsibility. You love the forest, but you're going to have to clear around your home if you want to keep your home. You know, sometimes you make your own luck, and I think that's what we did. We were very fortunate to have the people, the fire resources here available for us, but it's nice to know that we helped them defend our house.
Protecting your home against the ravages of wildland fire, if you live in a community like this, I mean, that should be as high a priority for you as mowing your lawn.
If you can even do that first 30 feet around your home, then that's going to significantly increase the odds of that structure's survival.
How can you ask somebody to defend your house if you don't want to help them? That's the thing, you know, you got to help them. All they want is a fighting chance.
So I think to come back, drive in my driveway, see that fire truck sitting in my driveway still, and those guys there.
I get emotional once you know the people.
You know, we had been told that our house had burned. People just insisted. 3 people just said, I know it did. I know for a fact. So to drive in here and find those firefighters standing here greeting us, I'll just never forget them ever. I hope that I get to see them and visit with them again.
I'll just add that no structures were lost anywhere. This is what it looked like in part of our development. 50 of our 940 acres did burn. It burned down to where the firefighters were able to do the back burns. So you can see it was quite devastated in certain areas. It's a mosaic. And I want to talk a bit about what happens after the fire, because frankly, we never thought about that. That wasn't in our protection plan. Just a small rain, 1/4 of an inch, brought major mud flows. And this is our main road. And more than once, this got washed out. This is, we had actually rebuilt the road. You can see 2 large culverts we put in, and a half an inch of rain, the whole road was washed out. You can kind of see up here by the Volvo, a line across there. La Plata Electric Association had to come in, dig out their electrical lines, put in 2 new junction boxes, string the line between it so we could rebuild the road, and then they could restore their crossing, and they moved their wiring up the hill because we couldn't maintain it. We had a lot of help. NRCS provided seeds for us. This is a Boy Scout troop that came up. We had hundreds and hundreds of volunteer hours. We put down the straw, weed-free straw. We did the straw wattles. Before these volunteers came in, because this is fairly flat, but in that area that you saw that was really steep, we did, I had professionals come in to handle it, and they did contour felling. So we could start to create something that we could put that grass seed down that was for the hillsides, and then we had a different grass seed for meadows so that we could start controlling the erosion. Our development is 800 feet above another whole development and string of businesses below us. And our concern was holding the water as much as we could, not only to prevent damage to our roads and to our homes, but especially to those below us, because once that water left us, we couldn't slow it down. This home is built on a lot that actually the home burned in the Valley Fire in 2002. This home was built in 2017, and you can see all the things they've done. They built it according to Firewise standards, and we're really pushing for that. My husband is a county commissioner for La Plata County, and they're working as commissioners to get the right codes put into place for the county, and the city is now looking at it to really, give some distance around, put non-flammable materials up, put a metal roof on, to try to make our homes much safer. So from 1999, when you couldn't cut a tree down or pick up a piece of firewood, by 2019, I had convinced the board to bring in a logger, and we logged, 2,000 stems. We record every year about 3,500 volunteer hours in mitigation. And that particular year in 2019, we had 3,800 or more hours that people actually remembered to turn in. And you can see a decking area and loading the logging truck. Last year, we weren't able to do as much because there wasn't a market. And that's something that we're working on, is creating a market. Now, this is a photo when we got the national award. The people in this photo, you can see that here's Chief Doty and Randy Black and one of the EMTs. Here's Amanda, here's Charlie. Here's Kent Grant with Colorado State Forest Service. Here's my guy that runs the chipper. Here's the one in charge of common property. Then I've got these 2 gals were original Firewise ambassadors back in 2011. And everyone else, and here's Pam Wilson, who founded Firewise of Southwest Colorado. All these folks are what it takes with the volunteers and the partners to protect a community and to reach out to others. One of the things we do, and I invite you to ever want to come and visit us, this was a group of about 30 people that came from 8 states. We like to tell the story of what we do and how we did it and why we do it, and then take them out and show them the results. We're working on it all the time, but it gives them ideas they can take back. Excuse me. One thing, this past fall, we had a fire started that you can see to the right, obviously set, and fortunately it was noticed at sunset by 2 of our residents who biked back. We found out, we knew it was a 30-minute response time, but in that time we found out it was a 45-minute response time. Volunteers kind of kicked it apart and used a fire extinguisher. And now we've formed our own rapid response team. We need to be ready. That's too long to wait for somebody So some of these are the things that I've purchased. When they tell me what they need, I write the grants and we get it done. Plus, our homeowners association now has $23,000 a year in the budget to help with fire mitigation, and another $30,000 they set aside because a lot of the grants we get are reimbursement. You have to put the money out first. And we've just recruited 3 volunteers to go to the full structure wildfire training so that they can drive those trucks that are sitting in that firehouse, and we can use those tools as well. So my encouragement to you is to keep on working to maintain that healthy forest for the plants and the animals. You have to trim, selectively remove weed, and craft a best practices proactive action plan each and every year. And I commend you for coming to this seminar and following up with other webinars that will come down the way. Volunteers and funding are essential, but our message is be responsible and be prepared. And that's how you can lower the chance of a catastrophic wildfire taking out not just your home, but your neighborhood. You don't want to be the neighbor that caused the neighborhood to burn down. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulette, for that
Yes.
presentation. And up next, we have
Thank you.
Jenna Trentadue. She's from the Oregon Department of Forestry. And Jenna, whenever you're ready, go ahead. Just want to point out that we are answering your questions in the Q&A chat box. So go ahead and click on that to find those questions answered. If we have time at the end, we'll also answer those questions live for you. Go ahead, Jenna.
Thanks, Carrie. And Paulette, that was incredible. I have to just say that personal experience and everything that you guys went through and everything you did is just really inspirational. And I hope that so many of us here, even though we're in Oregon, can take, kind of that message home with us on what can we do. So I work for the Oregon Department of Forestry. I'm the National Fire Plan Coordinator here at ODF, and I do all of the FireWise liaison stuff for the state. And I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about what we have available here in Oregon. Before I do that, I just really want to quickly give a little bit of context. I saw some questions coming into the chat and Q&A and stuff about Oregon specific wildfires. And I thought it would just be helpful really quickly to share a map with you guys of what our fire season looked like. I changed my mind and decided I really want to do this just to give you guys an idea of really what we dealt with this season. So I'm going to give you guys a really quick visual of this. Give me just 1 second. I'll pull it up. Hopefully you guys can see. Carrie, you got that?
We sure do. It looks great.
Great. Okay, so as you can see, we had a ton of stuff going on this year. I'm going to kind of scroll around since the map is so giant, you really can't get a full view of this. So a lot of you guys probably had the experience with the Riverside fire kind of coming up and threatening sort of Portland area, Oregon City. We had the Beachy Creek fire, and then the Lions Hedge fire that kind of joined into the Beachy Creek fire and created this massive amount of fire here. The Holiday Farm fire down here in Eugene area. Then we had Archie Creek and South Obenchain and the Alameda fire, Slater. There was just a ton going on here. And this is just sort of a quick snapshot of what our 2020 fire season looked like overall, total, including federal, state, all the landowners. We had over 1 million acres burned this year in 2020. So I'm sure that a lot of you guys are listening to this presentation and thinking, oh my gosh, I had this experience with the fire, with the evacuation, or maybe even just getting ready to go. And it kind of really spurred your thoughts and your ideas. And as tragic as it is that we had to deal with a fire season like this, to start thinking that way, it's super important for us to take advantage of this now, because as Carrie mentioned earlier, the fire season is not going to get easier as the years go on. So definitely let's keep that concept in mind as we're moving forward. So let me go ahead and share you guys a little bit more information about Oregon specifically. Colorado has an amazing program with their Wildfire Adapted Partnership. and everything that Paulette was talking about. But Oregon is not exactly the same as Colorado. So we need to kind of look at this in context. So I'm going to kind of walk you guys through, hopefully fairly quickly to make up a little time, fire adapted community options that we have here in Oregon. So the first question you're going to ask is, how do I begin? If you don't have anything set up, where do you start? So I'd say the first thing you want to do is start having that conversations in your community. Find other people interested, start bouncing some ideas off of each other. What are your goals? What are your concerns? What are the things that you really want to focus on to help mitigate for any of that concern that you have in your neighborhood? Second thing I say is reach out, go contact who you feel the most comfortable with. Who do you know? Is it the local fire department? Is it an ODF office? Even like our natural resources, OSU Extension. All of us are connected. All of us know about the different programs we have available. So just reach out to who you feel comfortable to get started. And then they can guide you where you need to go. Or myself, now that you're listening to this webinar, please reach out to me if you have questions. Every community is different. Every community has different opportunities and every community has different needs. So just keep that in mind. This is not a one size fits all. So we got to kind of work with that. So, get some advice from the experts, start asking them questions, have them come out and take a look if they're available, do some assessments of the homes in your neighborhood. If you just want to kind of get a general sense of what's going on, see if somebody will come out and take a look. A lot of the fire departments and ODF offices have people available to come out and do that, and, at no charge or anything as part of their job. So then choose a path forward. Once you find out some information, decide how you want to go forward with this. Do you want to do a formalized program like Firewise, or do you just want to kind of do an informal thing with your community? Do you want to follow like a ready, set, go plan? There's a lot of different options. So make a plan, commit to sustainability and renewal so that you can build off of that program every year. And then look into other complementary opportunities. As you get going into this, there's a lot of different options available that you can build if you start kind of going in this direction. So keep in mind, there's a lot of complementary things out there, especially through like forest health and things like that when you get into kind of that bigger look at things. My thing there we go. So what does a fire adapted community look like? I just wanted to give you guys a couple of different looks because there is quite a few different ways that this can look at. You can do just an education and outreach. This is a community that did a bunch of education outreach. There's native and fire resistant vegetation. I do a bunch of talks to local garden clubs and stuff about, how to look into native and fire resistant plants to help minimize their risk. And that's been an excellent avenue for them because they're already out there doing their gardening. How can I do something that I'm already doing, but do it through the lens of being more fire safe? And that's really how you got to think about this. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew initially. You just got to think about what am I doing now and how can I make it a little bit safer and just build off that. Sorry, there we go. So these were a few more different options. Emergency maintenance. These guys worked on, clearing off the emergency areas and painting the hydrants. Fuels mitigation. Obviously, we always encourage doing, pruning, mitigation, things such as Paulette was talking about. There's a lot of different avenues with that. And then the chipping option here too. These guys had available a chipper that they were able to remove a lot of those fuels and reduce their impacts and risk. So Firewise USA is Oregon's kind of biggest program right now when you're talking about fire adapted communities. This is an NFPA program, that's the National Fire Protective Association, that we implement in Oregon, and it's geared towards community wildfire planning. And they have really great guidelines. A lot of that is based off of Jack Cohen's work. So if you're just curious and you don't want to jump too far into this, go onto YouTube and type up Jack Cohen and wildfire planning or mitigation, and you'll find some great videos in there just to kind of get a good idea and some, get some of those questions answered in a kind of less scary way if you don't want to reach out to your ODF office or fire department. So it creates a lot of positive collaboration to take action before a fire. And that's really what we're trying to do, is get prepared. These are all Firewise communities that we've done here in pictures, getting everybody involved. I love too how Paulette talked a lot about how this is a socialization. You know, it's about bringing your community together. How can you do that? Even in COVID-19, which I know we're all struggling with right now, you know, thinking outside the box, how can you still get your community involved? How can, you know, maybe right now, while everything's going on, you guys are just talking about bouncing off ideas through email, whatever you're doing, you know, trying to think of different things that you're going to address once you're able to then work together and do some of these things. You can also do a Firewise community individually with, you know, each person in the community is doing the work around their own homes, and you're all reporting that to somebody, and then you become a Firewise community through kind of the Firewise process. I'm not going to get too deep into that. We just don't have time today, but I'd be happy to answer any questions, either personally through my email. I'll leave my information at the end, or you can find out more by just calling your local ODF office. So the benefits of the Firewise program is that, you know, I'm just going to generally summarize these. It creates a framework for action. You can learn more because it's going to give you a lot of education. You're talking to your technical experts, so they're going to help you learn a lot. It gives you a peace of mind. You can understand what your risks are and how you can mitigate those things. And it gives you self-empowerment. You can do something about it. It's not just watching it on the TV and being scared that the fire is going to come burn up your home. This is what you can do now to make a difference to you and your neighbors. Even if they're not willing to do it, if you do it, they see it, the neighborhood starts making a difference. That's where you can start to encourage those other neighbors who maybe aren't as on board as you'd like them to be, which is a common thing. I apologize about that. So community building is a huge piece. As you know, Paulette mentioned, there's a lot of, you know, get together days that happen. There's citizen pride, and then you got some publicity through the Firewise program. You get a plaque, you get recognized nationally, and you get some signage. And then there's funding assistance associated to Firewise, but Firewise itself does not have any specific funding for it. However, we have other programs that work in tandem with Firewise, and I'll get to that in just a second. So funding, this is what people like to talk about, but it's probably one of the most complicated topics that I can try and cover right now. I am going to give you such a high-end view of this, and then if you have more questions, again, we can go other routes to talk more about these things. But funding for these type of things can come at a state, federal level. That's where you're going to contact your local ODF office. They may have grants available that they can put these kind of things on the, you know, some fuels mitigation or education outreach, different types of grants that we have available through the state that were federally funded. Those are specific to certain areas though, so your area may not be included in that. It doesn't mean that you don't have opportunities, just be aware this is not throughout the whole state. It could just be in certain areas. There's also county funding. Some counties have what's called Title III funding. Some counties have the FEMA FMAG funding. That's also due to after the fire kind of recovery things. So if there's been a declaration of an emergency wildfire in certain counties, they have access to certain funds to do mitigation work and wildfire planning. So just kind of reach out to your county. That's another place to go to look for funding and see what's available. The local Office of Emergency Management is also part of that. But they also have sometimes other resources you might find useful. So that's another good place to start. The Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, they have funding as well. And oftentimes their funding is kind of either forest health related, or sometimes it's like if you did defensible space around your home, they might be able to help you do some additional work kind of beyond just around the home. Maybe like you have 30 acres and you want to do some of the work further beyond your home to minimize your risk. That's where some of their funding might come in. Oregon State Fire Marshal, local fire department, they often have different kinds of grants and funding that come available to them. Again, it all depends on what area you're in. Firewise grants. So Firewise grants, once you become a Firewise community, they have available like a competitive grant program that you can apply to get like $500. to help you do some mitigation work. It's not a ton of money, but it's another resource and a nice little thing that State Farm supports through a Fireways program. And then lastly is private funding. A couple that I found is FM Global does a fuels mitigation type of education outreach grant that you can apply for right up. If you're a certain type of organization, nonprofit, state can do it, and there's other opportunities there. And I've seen State Farm have some grant funding available, though I don't know of any right this minute. But these are all different options, and it's really hard to figure out. So I would just definitely say, reach out to ODF or reach out to your local fire department, and they can help you guys navigate some of these funding resources that you're looking for. So resources in Oregon, there's the Firewise USA web address, and I believe that Carrie kind of put these all available to you guys through her side of things, OSU Extension. And then Oregon Explorer is another option. I'm not going to get too far into that. That's a whole nother webinar, but Oregon Explorer is a website you can go to look at mapping and information on what wildfire risk you have at your home or in your community or at the watershed level. So that's definitely a great resource if you just want to go on and take a look and see, okay, well, I'm curious. I want to know what is my risk level? What kind of things am I dealing with out here? It's kind of an easy way to go check that out, play with the different layers and see, what's your burn probability? What's the probability of you having 4-foot flame lengths? What is the vegetation in your area? What is the risk? They filter a lot of different things into there, so you can kind of play with it. OSU Extension also has additional mapping on their Oregon Explorer program that has other things completely unrelated to wildfire that are also really awesome and cool to check out as well if you're on that page. I definitely encourage you to take some time to look at it. I added some additional things like landscape plants and plant links. People ask a lot about native plants and kind of what should they replace their stuff with. It really depends on where you're at in Oregon. So I can't answer your questions probably directly on this particular webinar, but I would definitely say look into it. There's a lot of resources available and most all of them are free. So this is the Oregon Explorer map. I just kind of pulled one real quick to show you guys. This is fire starts going back to 1992, all the fire starts that have happened in Oregon, and that's human and lightning caused. And what's interesting, you can really see, how on the left side you're dealing with a lot of the human caused because that's where a lot of people more live, and the lightning kind of as you go east, you got a lot more of that. So it's kind of interesting. But as you can see, all the data includes all these different pieces that you can look into. So definitely check that out. So real quick, I'm going to try not to take too long here, but I wanted you guys to see some success stories that were specific to Oregon and specifically to the 2020 fire season. Now we're still pulling a lot of this information. So there's other success stories out there. So don't think this is inclusive at all. These were just a few that I picked up quickly just to kind of share with you some things that might be more specific to you if you live in Oregon. So, excuse me, the Holiday Farm Fire was in Eugene, and that was in 2020 this year. And I was driving along in this area, and I was going to go look at a home that had done defensible space around it. And I looked across the street, and I'm going to show you the home in a minute that did do the defensible space. I looked across the street and I noticed that this particular property had been obviously devastated by the fire. And it was a very, very sad sight. And I definitely will say that the one thing I really notice about this is the herbavitas. So these are herbivita sticks is what I call them. That's what happens when a fire gets near an herbivita, it'll go up like a candlestick. And what happened is it created a ladder straight up to the home. And as you can see in the second kind of photo right here, the grass is actually kind of green still. I mean, you can see that specifically the fire most likely just burned through this vegetation. It led right up to the home, and unfortunately it was full devastation for this home. There might have been some additional defensible space things going on there, obviously, but I think definitely the vegetation played a huge role in that. So I wanted to show that because I'm going to show you right now what the home, I literally turn across the street, and this is the home across the street. So that's a significant difference. You can definitely see the defensible space there, the green lawn. They had done a lot of pruning and mitigation behind the home there to kind of create some space between a lot of the trees and vegetation that was behind the home. And this home survived. And literally across the street, I'm going to go back one more time just for impact here. Across the street, turned around, and this is what you saw. So I just want you to understand that what you do makes a difference, and it can mean a lot. And living in Northwest Oregon doesn't mean that wildfire doesn't happen. And we've seen that this year. So this was another home that made it. I call this the survivor because this had wood shake siding, which gosh, in Firewise, I definitely would have been like, oh my gosh, I don't know about this house if it would have made it through, but look at it. They did some fuels mitigation here. That's my picture on the right-hand side. After they did all the fuels mitigation, they created that separation between the ground and the lower branches of the large mature trees. And what that did is, even though they left ground cover, which is perfectly fine, you don't have to remove everything. It doesn't have to be a moonscape. Then it still created enough separation that when this wildfire went through and it was moving super fast, it just blew right through, and it just, you know, you can see all those scars on the trees after the fire, but this home completely survived. It had plenty of defensible space around it. There was actually a creek right behind it. And this home completely, it survived everything intact. There's nothing burned on this home at all. It was incredible. This was the Beachy Creek fire. This is the one that was up closer to kind of Salem, Oregon City sort of area, Santiam area. And just kind of this impacted me, this looking at the fuels mitigation that was done on the left side versus the one on the right, and how badly it burned on the right-hand side without that mitigation. And on the left, how they had plenty of trees there, that was fine. But just how they cleared everything out underneath it so embers didn't have a place to stop. So hopefully I didn't go too long. I apologize if I did. Here's my contact information. Oregon Department of Forestry. I work in Salem, Oregon, and you guys are more than welcome to reach out to me directly, or I'd be happy to answer questions. And I think this is kind of our full question time. So I'm going to kind of turn it over to Amanda or Carrie here and let them lead, and I'll be happy to answer anything as they go.
Thank you so much, Jenna. And I know we're getting close to time, but please hang on. Just so it was my job to recap the earlier presentations, and wow, Paulette, like literally goosebumps. Your stories are just incredible. And Jenna, thank you. Actually, thank you to all of the presenters, Ashley, Charlie, Paulette with the Wildfire Adapted Partnership, and Jenna again with the Oregon Department of Forestry. Also want to shout out to the Oregon's Extension Fire Program team who have been working in the background to answer your questions. Don't worry, I'll get those questions and answers to you with a follow-up email. So if you didn't get a chance to check on your question, I'll send that via email. So as I said at the beginning, y'all, this is the start of our journey. The Oregon State University Extension Service fire specialists and its partners like Jenna with the Oregon Department of Forestry and so many other wonderful partners want to work with you to provide you the information and tools necessary to help mitigate your risk of wildfire. We encourage you to take action. Reach out to your local fire department and or to your local Oregon Department of Forestry and make a plan. Also, look into the Firewise USA program to help in your community planning. I'm actually my neighborhood's Firewise chair, and my neighborhood was designated a Firewise community in 2014. We went from not thinking about fire or that fire could ever affect us to now understanding fire and mitigating our risk of wildfire. A bonus is that not only am I contributing to protecting my neighborhood, I really have a sense of community with my neighbors, and both Jenna and Paulette touched on that in their presentations. Jenna mentioned many resources to get you started, and I've pulled all that information. I put all that information on the webinar webpage. And then also on that webpage are notices and information for our upcoming fire preparedness and prevention campaign. Check back often as I get the details dialed in and posted. I know we're 1 minute to 4:30. But the speakers have agreed to stay on the line for another 15 minutes beyond our 4:30 time to continue answering your question. I know some of you may need to leave right at 4:30, so I want to thank you now for joining us. We recognize some of you are still going through difficult times. We hope today's webinar was a sliver of hope that you will recover and that you are not alone. So at this time, we'll open it up for live question and answer. All right, let's see what we have left. We only have one question left, and please go ahead and put other questions into the Q&A, but this question reads, it would be great to burn the debris with biochar kilns in order to keep the carbon on the earth rather than in the atmosphere. The char can be left to enhance the soil or be used for many other purposes like barn sanitation or inoculated with compost then to enhance vegetable soils. And I'll say absolutely, Victoria. Anybody else want to say some words about biochar kilns? Oh, go ahead, Paulette. You can go ahead.
Okay, well, we don't have biochar kilns, but the one of the things we do a balance between the air curtain burner, which doesn't create smoke, but then when we do our chipper, we take the chipper into the forest and we leave a layer about an inch thick or less. And it's the same thing. Let's get nutrients back on the ground. It's a moisture barrier to keep the moisture in. So however you can achieve that, I think it's really important to keep some of the nutrients there and minimize the amount of smoke in the atmosphere.
Okay, so this person says that they're gathering 30 neighbors for a fire mitigation meeting at their home in Silverton in April. It looks like there's so much to do to get the effort underway. What do you recommend we focus on first? Who wants to take that? Charlie.
So that's a huge part of my job, working with different communities and figuring out those best steps. And it's a little tough without knowing your community specifically because it is different in every community. But I generally would say that the first step is just education and get information out there. There are lots of great resources about what specifically mitigation looks like for your type of property, your forest type, in regards to slope and aspect and all sorts of different things. So try to connect with the best information available from those local resources and get that out into the community. And then from there, I'd say, as a community, I think that one of the first steps is connecting with those local fire professionals and kind of asking them what their biggest concerns are. It really takes a whole group of professionals with different focuses, whether it's forestry, whether it's wildfire, or whether it's even infrastructure, to figure out kind of what the most important steps are to prioritize. I will say that generally in my communities, what we start by focusing on is really encouraging homeowners to do that defensible space work from the home out, as well as retrofitting those homes if necessary to meet those FireWise standards. And then from there on the community level, we often start along the roadways. That not only is generally going to be kind of the biggest natural fuel break already in there, or not natural, but man-made fuel break. So expanding that to have the roadways be that potential point to stop a fire, but also for that safety aspect of people evacuating while those fire personnel are trying to get in.
That's spot on, Charlie. Thank you so much for that. Just quick here, if you haven't already put in your feedback on that poll, go ahead. If you're not seeing the poll, I think my screen looks a little bit different, but on my screen, it's in the lower part of my screen, and it says polls, and you can just click on that and hopefully that poll will pop up for you. So let's see, we've got more questions here in the Q&A. And so Pam asked, to buy biochar is expensive. Would this be an opportunity for a community to produce biochar for sale? And John, do you want to take that?
Sure, those are great questions on biochar. You know, Utah State University and Darren McAvoy and their crew has been working on that extensively. We invited them to Colorado and some other states around the West to do their tour. Small scale, great idea. Large scale, we just don't necessarily have that figured out just yet. So there's opportunities coming, and I think with more and more interest, there might be more opportunities. And it is a great idea. It's expensive to buy, but it's very, very expensive to produce. So do a search, Utah State University biochar, and you'll see some of the webinars and other things that have been presented on that topic. And maybe you can figure out some other ways. And there are some homemade ones as well. So more to come on that, hopefully, but I wouldn't say it's going to be the silver bullet, if you will.
Great. And just a shout out to John Rizzo, who is one of our newest fire specialists. He came on board last week. He is stationed in the Northeast Fire Service area in La Grande. So a warm welcome to John, and thank you for that answer, John. So we have a question here that says, where can I get information on how to possibly survive a burn over if trapped in a fire zone?
Carrie, this is Chris Adlam here. I did respond to that question earlier.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe the response didn't come through or something like that, but I can address it. If you're caught in a fire, and we hope this doesn't happen, of course, but it's always preferable to be within a building, or if you're in a car, you stay in your car. The fire front passes over usually in a matter of minutes. So you want to keep from being exposed to the heat. If you're in a car, you want to hunker down below the window level and cover up with wool blankets if you have some. If you're in a house, fill up the tubs with water, move furniture away from the windows, and that would be the safest thing to do. And I did put a link in my response from the University of California's Extension Fire Program, or the equivalent, and they had some great resources. So I'll just put that in the chat right now if you want to go deeper into what to do in that situation.
Great. And Chris is our Oregon State University's fire program fire specialist in Southwest Oregon. So thank you, Chris, for that. And we have a hand raised. Lourdes, if you want to please type your question into the Q&A. I can't actually give you speaking capabilities unless you're a presenter. So I'm going to move through here, and we have, after the Shellahan Mountain fire, my neighbors on our road have agreed to work on a seasonal secondary exit road that will be wide enough and support fire trucks / equipment. Are there grants available and a template for an agreement with neighbor for using their dam access? Sorry, I kind of didn't say that very eloquently, but you can see the question in the Q&A there. Does anybody want to take that on grants? Maybe Jenna or
Okay, I'm having technical difficulties. Give me just.
Okay, sure, no problem.
So they're looking for grants on road.
Well, let me read it again. So on a road have agreed to work on a seasonal secondary exit road that will be wide enough to support fire trucks. Maybe are there grants available to support that work of expanding their road, and maybe a template for an agreement with a neighbor?
I think that you're dealing with a lot of different pieces there. It's not purely fuels mitigation. You're actually putting in a road, and you're dealing with an agreement with the neighbor to use dam access. Those are all it's complicated. There's a lot of different reasons. I would say putting in a road is not going to be something ODF would be able to do, though we could do fuels mitigation like around the road. The fire department could have something available, possibly, that could address that, the access piece. And then I would say with the neighbor who using their dam access, a lot of times ODF does sometimes put together, certain agreements, or they have kind of places listed that they can pull water. So I would definitely get a hold of the local ODF office and ask them if the neighbor is wanting to do that. I mean, I don't know, I'd have to say the neighbor would need to be on board. But if they were, then having them kind of hook up with ODF to create, a kind of an agreement that we can access the water from their property or whatever. I think that would be the best way to do it. It's a little bit complicated. I think you'd have to have somebody come out and actually take a look at what exactly this person was trying to do.
Yeah, and Paulette had her hand raised, and I don't know, Paulette, if you want to say something related to this question or.
Yeah, we've been able to write in creating passing lanes on our road as part of some of our grants. So when you look at a grant, don't just think mitigation. Think what can you do? And another piece we did was put up reflective numbers and bought those for every property owner so that they showed up if it was smoky or if it was at night. So just kind of think when you're kind of broadening out your what else could help. And that made a difference for us, especially as we were exiting. The fire department estimated during the 416 it would take 4 hours to evacuate our 100 sites, and it took just over 2, which meant they came in a lot faster, and that made a difference for them and for us. So do think about including it in those mitigation grants.
Yeah, and just to add to what Paulette said, we do have some of our mitigation grants do include things like that, where we can put up, reflective address signs and things like that, especially in the fire department sometimes as well. So check into that for sure. I know we've done that before.
Great, thank you, Paulette and Jenna. I think we have time for one more question here, and that is, this person says, my neighborhood has some acreage of area of BLM land that needs fuel reduction. The BLM land is near us. Who can I talk to in order to get help with future attention to that land? Well, I would say personally contact your local BLM office and have a communication with them about that. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything to that, but I'll say over and over, local, local, local. Charlie, go for it.
I don't know who in your area is the specific appropriate person to contact, but the thing that I've always heard from the BLM offices in this area time and time again is that they want to be good neighbors, and they want to, in particular, help treat their side of the fence if the neighborhood is doing their part on their side. They want those contiguous treatments that are next to each other, because that's going to be more effective for both treatments in the long run. There's one specific example that is from the Rafter J neighborhood here, where we brought in a BLM partner to look at the neighborhood for that community assessment that I mentioned earlier. And it happened to be that our ambassador lives right next to the BLM parcel. And the BLM had this list this parcel on their list for treatment for years, and they just didn't have a contact to get access to that. So within 2 months, they had that 40-acre parcel treated. I don't want to always promise that it's going to happen that quickly, but and I will mention that is the fastest turnaround time I have seen for that type of treatment. But it was really amazing to see that, where it was the only barrier was getting access and getting those two people into a conversation together. So reach out to your local office and see if they're already working on that, or if not, kind of what it would take from you and your community to try to prioritize that as much as possible.
Perfect. Thank you, Charlie. And just finally, somebody asked, how do you find those mitigation grants, rural, suburban? Jenna mentioned a lot of great resources. I've posted all of those on the fire program website, so check those out. If you have more questions related to that, you can always contact Jenna. She provided her email at the end of her slide, and I have her information on the fire program website. So that concludes this webinar for tonight. Like I said, we're going to be launching into a fire preparedness and prevention webinar series here coming up in the next couple of months. Check back to our fire program website for more information on that. Thank you. Thank you to the presenters, to those behind the scenes, typing away at the answers to your questions, and to all of you. This is the first step. You've all already made your first step. Thank you so very much. And I look forward to connecting with you all again on our next webinar. Good night and be safe.